Am I the jerk for not wanting to invite my relative to my graduation? I am a 17-year-old female getting ready to start my senior year of high school. My family is incredibly proud of me and excited for my graduation and life after. The only issue is my father's side of the family. My father is a 46-year-old male, and I are on good terms and have only had one real disagreement before this. The topics we tend to disagree on usually involve his sister, a 44-year-old female named Lisa, and my grandparents. I do not want to include her because she has been abusive to me in the past. This is a long story, so I'll condense it as much as possible. My father and his family, sister and parents, were not on good terms before I was born. My father didn't even talk to them from the time he met my mother until it was time for them to get married. My mother encouraged my father to invite my grandparents and Lisa to participate in the wedding, to which he reluctantly agreed. They attended the wedding, and Lisa blew up about my mother, not allowing her to be a bridesmaid when my mother had asked her to be one and she refused. Lisa was most likely drunk or high. Fast forward to when I was born, and my mother contacted my grandparents to tell them that I was here. I was their first grandchild, so naturally they were attached. But that attachment grew to be quite unhealthy and still kind of is. As a baby and a toddler, once my parents went back to work, I was sent to a close family friend as she was the family babysitter. She would take care of me and the other little girls in the family, take us to fun places, and do our hair. When I was around 3 or 4 years old, she sustained an injury that didn't allow her to take care of us the way she used to. So my parents took me to my paternal grandparents' home where Lisa, unemployed at the time, was staying. Initially, there was nothing wrong between me and Lisa, but something changed. My aunt on my mother's side, let's call her Dee, lived in New York for the greater part of my life and would visit around once every 4 months prior to moving here permanently in 2017. She lived near the American Girl doll factory and store and decided to buy me one and send it to me. I loved that doll and carried her everywhere, and that made Lisa jealous. She would often accuse me of favoring Dee over her and being ungrateful for Lisa taking care of me while my parents left me. I would always say this wasn't true, but one time she took the doll from me and placed it on a high shelf that I couldn't reach even if I climbed something. I spent a good portion of that day crying, and she didn't give me the doll back until my grandmother came home. She gave it to me once she saw her car pull up, so when my grandmother came in, it was my word against Lisa's. Fast forward to when I was around 9 years old. Lisa would take me and my godsister to places like the movies and the aquarium. One particular day, we went to the mall. My grandmother had given me money to buy myself some small things and pay for my food if need be. Lisa called me and my godsister to the food court for lunch. I got in line for Chick-fil-A, a few places behind Lisa, because I was going to pay for my food separately. Lisa called me up to her spot and paid for both mine and her food and made me pay her back. Being somewhat smart, I didn't understand why she'd make me give her $20, all I had were 20s, for a $9 meal. I respectfully asked her this, and she proceeded to yell and curse at me in the middle of the food court. She also body-shamed me because I chose to get a sandwich instead of nuggets. It hurt at the time, but now that I'm older, that makes zero sense. It may also be important to note that she was intoxicated here as well. In 2019, days before Christmas, my mother got into a huge fight with my paternal grandparents and Lisa and ended up calling the police. Little 13-year-old me tried to break it up, but Lisa, once again intoxicated, turned to me and said she'd beat me to a pulp after she'd beat my mother. I was shocked and just stood there staring at her with tears streaming. A few days later, my grandmother spoke to me and told me that Lisa called her and was extremely upset with herself for what she said to me. But Lisa never once apologized to my face, nor did she try to make up for it. On Christmas Day, I went to my grandparents' home and eventually ran into Lisa. Given what my grandmother had said, I thought that Lisa would be apologetic, but instead, she told my grandfather that I was ignoring her and rolling my eyes at her. I hadn't gotten the chance to say anything to her, and I was in the middle of throwing something away when she came in. My father told me to just ignore her behavior, but it was kind of hard when my grandfather pulled me aside to lecture me about being the bigger person. Fast forward to 2022, Lisa and I were kind of on good terms, but we weren't hanging out anymore. My grandparents wanted to fix that, so when they found out that I wanted to go see one of my favorite rappers who was on tour at the time, they decided to ask Lisa to take me. She rejected me to my face and made fun of my music taste by saying this particular rapper was boring and that I should go see someone more entertaining. I responded to this by saying, "It doesn't matter because I wasn't going to ask you to take me anyway. I've already asked my cousin to take me." After I said this, her attitude completely changed. She started listening to that particular rapper and trying to spark conversations with me about him. I ignored this and went to the concert without her. After the concert, my voice was completely gone due to me screaming. I stayed over at my grandparents' house after the concert was over. Lisa came over for God knows why and asked how the concert was. I told her I had fun and enjoyed hanging out with my cousin. She got defensive and accused me of favoring my cousin over her. I denied it, though my cousin did treat me better than Lisa did. She kept yelling at me, saying I was hateful like my mother, and eventually punched me in the face. I wasn't bruised, but I was stunned. I mentioned it to my grandmother, and she said that she didn't see it, so she won't say anything. After that, I kept as much distance from Lisa as I could. A few months later at Thanksgiving, I saw Lisa again. My grandmother had made me a cheesecake to share with my brothers, and Lisa wanted some. I refused her some of mine and offered her the one that was exactly the same from the kitchen. My grandmother agreed with me, and Lisa jokingly threw something at her. I jokingly said, "Be careful, you know she likes hitting people." Lisa stopped laughing and immediately got defensive and started calling me every name under the sun. I repeatedly said that I was joking, but it was true. Lisa started getting more and more hostile, and my grandfather eventually removed her from the house. Once again, and you might be noticing a pattern, Lisa was intoxicated. None of us spoke to her for weeks after that, but of course, my grandmother caved and called her one day. Lisa apologized only to my grandparents and admitted her alcohol addiction. She began therapy. Note that she called me crazy and unstable when she found out I was in therapy, and from what I hear, she's trying to turn over a new leaf. Here's where I may be the bad guy somehow. I have forgiven her, as I am a Christian and we are told by God to forgive. However, I have not forgotten anything she has done to me or said to me. I have not spoken to her since 2022, and I am perfectly fine with never speaking to her again. My father and my grandparents say that I need to get over all of this and go back to how things were, but I don't think I can. Going back to how things were means that I would have to take that kind of abuse all over again, and I can't make myself go through that. I have decided that because she hasn't been a part of my life from the beginning of sophomore year to now, I don't want to invite her to my graduation or my graduation party. My father says I shouldn't exclude her, and I haven't even spoken to my grandparents about it because I know they'll say I'm wrong. My mother is completely on my side and will support me in whatever I decide. So Reddit, am I the bad guy? Sorry if this is all over the place or makes no sense. I kind of typed this in a rush. This post has been removed because it violates Rule 5, no violence. We do not allow posts that concern violence, including any mention of it in any context. Please review the subreddit's rules and Rule 5 FAQs in their entirety, then message the mods before attempting to resubmit your story. Resubmitting without approval will lead to a ban, no exceptions. Am I the jerk for not allowing my adopted child to choose the movie on family movie night? I, a 45-year-old male, have 4 sons. 3 biological sons who are 17, 15, and 12 years old, and 1 adopted son who is 13 years old. We adopted Jake, our youngest, when he was 3 years old. He came from a really difficult background, and we've always tried to give him as much love and support as possible. But if I'm being honest, it hasn't been easy. Jake has always been more of a challenge compared to my other boys. He is extremely sensitive and gets upset over the smallest things. Due to the trauma he experienced early on, Jake is mentally and emotionally more like an 8 or 9-year-old, even though he is 13. This is not because of any special needs, it is just the result of what he has been through. When he was younger, he struggled a lot in school, to the point where he was eventually expelled from his primary school for behavioral issues. It was a really tough time for our family. We ended up enrolling him in a social, emotional, and mental health school, which costs around £70,000 sterling per year. While the school has helped him somewhat, Jake still causes a lot of problems. The school often calls us because Jake has had a meltdown or couldn't handle something, and it's clear he needs a lot more attention than our other children. At home, Jake's neediness can be overwhelming. He is constantly seeking reassurance and gets upset if things don't go exactly his way. My wife has always been very patient with him, maybe too patient in my opinion. She tends to cater to his needs a lot more than the other boys, and I can see it starting to wear on them. I can tell they're starting to feel like Jake gets special treatment. Earlier today, during our usual Saturday family movie night, this issue came to a head. We always vote on the movie to keep things fair. The older boys and I wanted to watch the first Avengers movie. When we voted, Jake was the only one who wanted to watch Spider-Verse instead. Jake loves Spider-Verse and we've watched it several times before. Seeing how upset Jake was getting, my wife suggested that we just watch Spider-Verse to avoid a meltdown. She felt it wasn't worth the fight and wanted to keep the peace, especially considering how sensitive Jake is. But I felt like it wasn't fair to the other boys who had won the vote fairly. I said no, we're sticking to the movie that won the vote. Jake predictably got really upset, stormed off to his room, and refused to come back downstairs. After the movie, my wife and I had a huge argument. She said I was being too harsh and that I don't understand how difficult things are for Jake because of his past. She thinks I should have just let him have his way to avoid the conflict, but I'm tired of walking on eggshells and constantly giving in to Jake at the expense of the other boys. I don't think it's right to let Jake dictate everything just because he is more sensitive. Am I the asshole for not letting my adopted son choose the movie on family movie night, even though it upset him and led to a huge argument with my wife? It sounds like working with a family therapist could really help, especially since Jake needs structure and balance, not coddling. Your wife means well, but she's teaching Jake that if he complains loudly enough, he'll get his way. It's important to support Jake while helping him learn to tolerate frustration and not always getting his way. Otherwise, he might end up with a very limited and lonely life. Am I the jerk for telling my parent they're no longer allowed to cook for my kids? My father, who is in his 60s, shops like a doomsday prepper. Whenever he gets groceries, he buys enough to feed a family of 5. He is also the type to buy food he does not plan on eating anytime soon, just in case he craves it. This has always been a problem. When I was younger, my sister and I spent more time at our mother's place, and were not there often enough to eat much. Nowadays, he lives alone, so even less of what he buys is eaten. The result has always been the same. A lot of the food he buys ends up either spoiled or sitting in a freezer indefinitely. We have never eaten anything that is rotten or moldy, but my father has always refused to listen when I tell him this is bad for his health. My family went to his place for dinner about a week ago. I arrived earlier to help my father out, as he planned on making burgers. My husband would come later with our children, who are a 5-year-old male and a 2-year-old female. I had offered to buy some burgers when we decided on them, but my father had said he had some at his place. I did not think about what that could mean until I saw him pull a box of burgers and some cheese from the very bottom of the freezer. As both had clearly been there a while, I checked the expiration dates. The cheese expired in February. I know dairy products can last longer frozen, but still. The burgers expired in March 2021. I asked my father if he actually planned on cooking that food. He said yes, as both were frozen and still fine to eat. I told him I did not care how edible he thought the food was. The meat was older than my daughter. We could think about something else to make, or I could have my husband pick up some burgers on his way to my father's place, but I did not want my children eating that. My father got offended. He started going on about how the food was safe and how a dozen nutritionists, some guys his girlfriend found on TikTok, had said so. He said he could not believe I did not trust him. He continued talking about how dramatic I was being for a while. I was very upset at the way he responded. Finally, I said, "My children are not eating that, and I do not want you cooking for them again. Either my husband buys the burgers or we are not staying for dinner." My husband ended up buying the burgers. We ate them peacefully, and no one fought in front of the children. The next day, my father told me he was upset by what I had said. He said he felt offended that I had accused him of putting his grandchildren in danger like that. I told him that was not my intention. I just did not want to feed my children 3-year-old meat, and he refused to listen to me. My father is still insisting I am being dramatic. My husband is completely on my side but thinks forbidding my father from cooking for our children might have been a little too much. Am I the asshole? You handled things appropriately. It's really a question of trust and food safety. While someone might personally be okay with eating burgers that have been in the freezer for a year or two, serving potentially expired or poorly stored food to others, especially young children, is irresponsible. Saying please don't serve my very young children expired food is entirely reasonable and ensures everyone's well-being. If someone gets upset about this request, it suggests they might not prioritize safety when you're not around. Am I the jerk for confronting my boyfriend's friends for being rude to me? My boyfriend and I have been together since middle school. Before we started dating, I was already hanging out with him and his friends. Although they considered me a friend most of the time, there were moments when I was excluded for being a girl or not knowing them as long. Still, we spent a lot of time together at school, hangouts and playing video games, something we still do to this day. Lately, however, some of my boyfriend's friends have started making rude jokes about me, saying things like, "Can I have the key to the chastity belt?" Or "Did your boyfriend get permission to say that?" The only other time I've seen something like this was when they made similar jokes about Jake's girlfriend, who is very rude and controlling. The worst offenders are 2 guys I'll call Jake and Herman. Today, my boyfriend was texting in our group chat, asking why Herman only joins us once a week. Herman responded saying that, "No way you're talking," implying my boyfriend needed permission to play, and even saying I ripped your boyfriend's headset off when we stopped playing earlier, when he wasn't on. At that point, I'd had enough. I told them they were being assholes and pointed out that I'm more flexible than both of their girlfriends. I spend almost every day playing games with my boyfriend and them, yet they were acting like I was super controlling. Even my boyfriend was getting annoyed by them. They laughed it off and said I was being ridiculous. I continued, calling out Herman for being obnoxious and highlighting the irony of him making such jokes when he barely plays because of his girlfriend. My final, admittedly unrelated and rude comment to Herman was, "I don't care what a guy who's trying to collect addictions like it's Pokemon thinks." The group chat continued with more mocking, and my boyfriend started getting upset, not with them, but with me. He said he had already talked to them about the issue, though this happened after I had already sent my initial message and they still ignored his wishes when he spoke to them. I started crying because of everyone ganging up on me, but instead of comforting me, my boyfriend mocked me for crying and then expressed frustration over how stuff like this always happens, essentially blaming me for the situation. When I suggested he get better friends, he shot back that I don't have any of my own. In the end, I told my boyfriend that I'm tired of his friends ganging up on me, and I don't want either of us to play games with them until they apologize. He thinks my stance is absurd and that it means we'll never play with them again, but I'm holding firm. Am I the asshole? You are not responsible for this. You have a right to set your own boundaries and stick to them. Boys often act immature and don't understand the impact of their words, but that doesn't mean your feelings don't matter. It's important to recognize that their behavior might be driven by jealousy or immaturity, and while it's fine to move on if it's not for you, your boyfriend should still respect your feelings. Am I the jerk for not being patient with my partner during their grief? We have always had communication problems, coming from different places and having different communication ideals. He tends to forget about issues easily, whereas I prefer to talk them out. He tends to escalate conflict to a point where he says mean things to me during discussions, which turn into arguments and lengthy problems. For this reason and others, we have not been intimate in years. When his father passed away a few years ago, things got worse for a while. We got through it and improved our communication in some ways, but in other ways, it now seems worse. Arguments often lead to insults from him and name-calling. I have been trying to make my boundaries around this kind of thing clear and consistent. His mother passed away just a couple of months ago. I was really close with her as well, and we have been grieving together. We were good for the first few weeks. However, after this time, I found he had set up a camera in the bedroom to record me while I was changing. I found it, and he swore it was the first time, but I felt so hurt and violated. Since then, I have been struggling. I did not want to leave him because of it, but I wanted him to feel remorse about it and work through it with me to get to the bottom of our communication and intimacy problems. I have been trying to be there for him through his grief while dealing with this huge violation and the way I feel about him and our relationship right now. Meanwhile, our communication has gotten even worse, and we have arguments often if not daily. Whenever I try to maintain my boundaries for speaking to me with respect or not calling me names, he says I am not patient with his grief and do not understand what he is going through. I understand that people in grief can be distant and suffering, and it must be horrible losing both of his parents within a few years. But I feel that I have been there for him for the most part, and it is really hard for me when I feel he betrayed me so recently. It hurts for him to throw it in my face every time we have a disagreement, that I am not being patient enough or understanding of his grief and suffering. So, am I the asshole? Your actions were justified. He is using his grief to manipulate and abuse, and secretly videotaping in the bedroom is definitely abusive. In this case, the nuclear option seems warranted. Pack your stuff and leave. There's no obligation to stay in a miserable relationship just for the sake of it. Am I the jerk for going to get myself food after taking my parent to the hospital? Hi, I think this situation has really blown out of proportion, but I need outside input. I, a 36-year-old female, have been seeing this guy, a 25-year-old male. We are in a long-distance relationship. He is from Texas, and I am from Canada. A few days ago, my 70-year-old mother started feeling unwell. This morning, I took her to the hospital. As soon as we got in to see the doctor, they gave her intravenous anti-nausea medication and some painkillers. The doctor thought it might be her gallbladder, but all tests were clear and the painkillers helped, so she was discharged with some heavy anti-nausea medication. We were told that if it persists to come back as soon as possible. Once home, she had some tea and toast and crawled into bed to rest. Since the painkillers were still in effect, I thought it would be safe to grab some fast food less than a 5-minute walk from our place. I told her I would go after she fell asleep, but to call in case she needed me and I would rush home. I left and came back without her noticing. I was gone for maybe 20 minutes. I ate and slept, and when I woke to check on her, she said she may need to go back as the symptoms have returned. My significant other seems to think my judgment cannot be trusted because I left the house while exhausted. For unrelated reasons, this is not the first time he has said that. Sure, I was exhausted, but that does not mean I am not going to care for myself. I did not want to cook after spending hours in the hospital, but he seems to think something bad could have happened because I was exhausted. I am an only child and live with my mom, so it is my responsibility to keep her purse and information safe while she is resting in the hospital and waiting to see the doctor. Mom was fine with me leaving to get food. She could not have cared less. I think she is probably happier I did it the way I did than pay for overpriced hospital food. I was taught that you eat and sleep when the person you are caring for eats and sleeps, which is exactly what I did. Should we have needed to go back to the hospital earlier than anticipated, being hungry and tired would have impeded my judgment more than going to the store while exhausted. My significant other is now saying he cares less about us after I told him off for trying to say I was wrong for leaving the house, and is playing the victim by saying he will not bring up how he feels anymore, which is frequent and feels more like criticism and control than concern. He believes it is poor judgment to go out in public not in a clear mind and well-rested, and that something bad, undefined by him, could have happened to me. Nothing I have said has gotten him to let up about this situation, and he still thinks how I handled feeding myself proves I have poor judgment. Meanwhile, my trooper of a mom is finally asleep and snoring peacefully. Hopefully, the second trip to the hospital will not be needed. Am I the asshole for leaving the house to feed myself after taking my mom to and from the hospital? You are not the jerk, but this does sound concerning. Your mom was sick, you were exhausted, and instead of offering support, your so immediately started criticizing you in a vague way? This feels more like criticism control than concern. Take some time to consider whether you feel respected overall in the relationship. Thanks for watching. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist in the description.